7 years. That's a number I hear a lot. 7 years of shooting. At this point, you know your settings. You understand light. You've put in the hours. You've studied photographers whose work you genuinely respect. And you still don't have a style. In other parts of life, they call this the 7-year itch. The point where something that used to feel like progress starts to feel like a dead-end loop. In photography, nobody calls it that. We don't have a name for it. All we really have is what it feels like. Everything you create looks like it could have been done by someone else. A dozen someone else's, actually. Every time you scroll through your portfolio, something just feels a little off. And you're not just able to pinpoint why. The work is technically solid, looks consistent, and still it doesn't feel like you. And it's not like you haven't put in the work. You've read the articles, watched a ton of videos. You've listened to the advice, shoot more, find your niche, study the masters, be consistent, give it 10,000 images. And none of that advice is wrong. The real issue is it's targeting the wrong problem. See, your style is never something you just find. There's nothing to find. You never lost it in the first place. It has been there since before you picked up your very first camera. The reason you can't locate it has nothing to do with how much you've shot and everything to do with how much you've accumulated. All right, here's the core issue. Every piece of advice about finding your style sends you outwards. It's out there. More shooting, more influences, more study, more gear, more comparing yourself against other people's work. The logic behind all this sounds like a solid solution, right? Build up enough exposure, enough taste, enough craft, and eventually something distinctive emerges. And here's what actually happens. You start shooting. You love certain photographers. Their way of seeing starts leaving a subtle imprint in how you see. You show your work and you get feedback. These images work. These have an impact. These don't. And over time, your instincts start calibrating towards what gets rewarded. You find a post-production approach that gets your images close to the look you admire. You get consistent results with positive feedback, so you keep going. 7 years later, your portfolio has built a very coherent look. And in all fairness, it really belongs to the dozen or so photographers that you absorbed and filtered through all the choices you've made. Yeah, no doubt your own eye is in those images somewhere. It's just buried under everything you've piled on top of it. So I'd like to give you a completely different way of looking at this. Okay, your visual voice, the actual thing that makes your eye yours, was operating long before you ever touched a camera. Before you knew what an f-stop was or you even had preferences. You noticed certain light, certain spaces, certain aspects of what created an emotion within you. You stopped in front of the things that caught your attention, long before you had any reason to take pictures of them. That instinct has never disappeared. It just got layered over as you learned photography. Think about it this way. When you started shooting, your eye was clean and uniquely yours. Your signal was clear. Then you began learning, which is absolutely the right thing to do. Learning is essential. But the very process of learning starts to add layers. And with each layer that you add, what originally inspired or stimulated you begins to change the output by the time it reaches the final image. So here's the good news. The original thing is still there. The work ahead isn't about developing more or adding more. It's about clearing all the layers that you've been covering it with. So let me name them specifically because they're the same for almost every photographer. The photographers you love, whose way of seeing has quietly moved you into your production. This starts as inspiration. Nothing wrong with that. It's healthy. You're supposed to look at great work. But at some point, inspiration becomes limitation. So gradual, you lose track of that line. You think you're making your images, when in reality, you're making a synthesis of theirs. The images that performed or got praised. See, here's the thing. Your nervous system is smarter than you think, and it registers what gets a response and starts nudging your work into that direction. So slowly, without your conscious permission, you start optimizing for the response. The images that feel most authentically yours often get the least reaction early on, so you make less of them. You try to absorb every possible compositional rule, internalize every editing workflow, every tutorial that changed how you see. These run in the background of everything you make, whether you intend them to or not. For example, the rule of thirds. It operates in how you see before you even consciously apply it. The color grade from the course you took 3 years ago is in your default processing by default. Techniques you've accumulated without interrogation become habit. And habits run the show while your actual instinct sits on the sideline and waits. The constant measuring of your work against others. Every scroll through Instagram or Flickr, every workshop where you see someone else's portfolio praised. Every time you think, their work looks like that. Mine looks like this. Each comparison recalibrates your standard towards their vision. And over time, you start trying to close the gap, which means moving towards them and away from yourself. So 4 layers, each one is completely rational. Each one is something that is chosen for a good reason. The issue is, all combined, they begin to compress your style. And your visual voice remains buried underneath all of that, patiently, quietly, just sitting there waiting. Now, what I observed over 40 years in commercial work was consistent. The most technically accomplished photographers in the industry, the ones who had mastered every aspect of the craft, were often the ones whose personal work really felt the most generic. Now here's the thing, I can totally relate to that, as I spent 40 years being rewarded for delivering creative directors or clients' vision with precision. My own eye had gone quiet from disuse. I got paid consistently for producing well-lit product images that generated sales. And those images kept the rent paid and the lights on in the studio. And if I'm honest, they never fed my soul. The commercial brief demanded precision, all the time. It was always the client's reality delivered as a file. My aesthetic preferences, well, they were mostly irrelevant. And now here's the interesting part. That restriction, which felt like a limitation, was actually protecting something I didn't fully understand at the time. Because occasionally I would find someone who'd been doing commercial work for 3 decades and still had a ferociously clear personal voice. So every time, the reason was the same. They kept the commercial work and the personal work strictly separate. The commercial work delivered what the client needed. The personal work answered to nobody. Now for me, the work that became my real visual voice had nothing to do with photography at all. And it was channeled fractal images. Completely different from the studio work. Made in a different state entirely. Completely untethered creative output with no expectations. And in many ways, that's exactly what kept the images pure. The commercial photography was the main income stream. The fractal work kept my creative process honest. Here's what I really want to leave with you and kind of just provide food for thought. What if your real style has nothing to do with photography? And I mean that seriously. Most photographers assume the answer to where is my style is somewhere inside photography itself. In the right genre, the right subject, the right aesthetic, the right editing approach. They search for it in the craft itself. But your visual voice, the actual frequency your eye operates at, might be living somewhere the camera hasn't gone yet. For some photographers, it's in their painting or videography. For others, it's music, the relationship between space and rhythm that shows up in how they frame. For some, it's architecture or theater, or just the way they decorate a room. For others, it's writing. The thing that stops you before you understand why, the thing that might be pointing somewhere that isn't photography at all, and when you finally go there, and you bring that back to the camera, something just clicks. The images start to feel like they came from the same place because they did. See, the camera is the instrument. What do you play on it? That question is more important than any technique you'll ever learn. So style is not a look. The look is what you see afterwards. Style is the state you're in when you're making the image. When you look at a photographer's body of work that has genuine coherence, where every image feels like it came from the same place regardless of subject, you're looking at a consistent inner state expressing itself across different contexts. The light they chose, the angles they used to capture subjects, the moment they pressed the shutter, how much space they gave things. All of it is the expression of a particular way of being in this world, not a particular set of techniques. You can study those techniques all you want. You won't access the state by learning the output. And I've learned that the only way in is to clear enough of the accumulated noise that your actual instincts start showing up in the work. It's already there, always has been. Your instinct knows what it wants to make. The question is whether you can hear it underneath everything else you've been listening to. So I want you to think back to before photography got serious, before the rule of thirds, before you had a camera you cared about, before you were paying attention to other photographers' work. What did you stop to look at? What light made you pause before you understood why? What weather? What time of day? What kind of face? What images in films and books on walls in the street stopped you? Write it down. This is not a creative exercise. This is an exercise in archaeology, because that is your signal. That is what your eye was doing before it got educated. And then push it further. Go back before any visual art. What else stopped you? What else could make time go away? What could you do for hours that felt less like effort and more like returning to something? That thing, whatever it is, might be where your real visual voice lives. And the camera can express it, but it may not be the source of it. So here's the interesting part. In 40 years, the photographers who came out of long commercial careers with the most distinctive personal work could almost always trace their visual sensibility back to something that predated photography. Something they'd brought with them, something they'd been drawn to before they had a vocabulary for it. Right? The camera was just the instrument. The music was already there before they picked it up. Okay, here are 5 things to do to remove old habits. Now, most photographers approach style as a construction project. Add influences, add technique, add hours, build towards something, go the other direction. Okay, so here's the first thing you can do. Stop looking at other photographers' work for 30 days, just a hard stop. What this does is interrupt the constant recalibration of your eye against external standards. After a month of shooting without that input, something in your work often starts to shift. You start making images that look more like you, because you're no longer measuring against anybody else's vision. So just try that experiment. Okay, step 2. Before you post anything, ask yourself one simple question. Would you make this image if nobody would ever see it? And just be honest with that. The images where the answer is yes, those are from your actual eye. Start paying attention to which pile is which. And step 3, impose a constraint. And this one is fun, and it's so important. One focal length for 90 days. One location, one light condition. See, the constraint forces you off the accumulation of technique and back to what you actually see. Yeah, it's uncomfortable for a couple of weeks. After that, something starts to clarify. Step 4, take an audit of your portfolio in a different way. Find the images that feel genuinely yours. The ones that feel like you made them rather than executed them. Not necessarily the most technically polished, the ones where something says, yeah, that's mine. What those images have in common, that quality, not the technique, is your signal. And the last step, step 5, write down what actually stopped you in your tracks before photography, before any visual art. What could you do for hours without noticing time? Where does your mind go when nothing is pulling at it? Go make images that are about those things. So that photographer with 7 years of shooting who still doesn't know what their style is, they haven't failed to develop enough. They've accumulated without removing enough. The eye they started with is still there. It has been patiently waiting while they went off and collected everything else. It's in the images that felt right before they understood why. In the captures they made when nobody was really watching. In the work that felt like a reflex and not like a decision. It's been there the whole time. Okay, your visual voice isn't something you build through the right influences and enough practice and the right gear. It surfaces when you clear enough away to let the thing that was always there come through. Your real style might have nothing to do with photography. It might be living in something you've been doing quietly on the side. Something that never really felt serious enough to give your attention to. Something nobody commissioned and nobody praised. It's more likely to be the thing that you made when nobody was watching, and it felt more like you than anything you've shot in the last year. Go find that thing and bring it back to the camera. You're not going to find your style. You're going to remember it. Thank you.